Welcome to this week's episode of the Digital Drop podcast. This week I'm joined by Vigan Ramadani. Vigan is head of web architecture and digital solutions for a multi-billion global industrial machinery manufacturing giant. And the topic of this week's conversation is driving digital change in a multi-brand organization. Vigan, welcome to Digital Drop. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to dive into today's conversation about, digital transformation and share some of the hard lessons I've learned along the way.
Looking forward to hearing what lessons you learn and how you overcome the challenges in the future based on those lessons. So before we get started, Vigan, you and I have been working together for about a year now, and I wanted to address typically when we do these podcasts, we talk about a challenge within a particular vertical, but in this instance, we've referred to this as a multi-brand organization or multi-brand group. The reason for this being is that verticalization is relevant, but there is also scale that comes into the picture when it comes to organizations within various verticals. And when you get to the very top of that scale, we're faced with large, complex groups of companies that all have a lot of commonality in the challenges that they overcome. And so, how would you describe a typical multi-brand organization?
No, that's a good question. In my opinion, a multi-brand organization is a company that owns, operates, and manages multiple distinct brands, which often target different customer segments, right? Sometimes different markets, sometimes even different product categories. And these brands typically maintain or want to maintain unique identities, obviously, as a brand, but also their own values and their own strategy. But they're part of a shared corporate structure usually that provides overarching resources, support, and governance. Often they don't like to hear the word governance, but it is necessary in this type of structures, right? And the thing is, the organization itself benefits a lot from economies of scale, shared infrastructure, and usually also cross-brand synergies, while they try to balance out the individuality of each brand and market positioning. So this is how I would describe and define a multi-brand organization.
Yeah, and I would agree. Taking it back a step, could you tell us a little bit? I mean, obviously, I know your background, but in your own words, could you just give us a little bit of an introduction as to your career uh, journey that's led you to where you are right now? Because I know that you've been in these large, complex organizations for, I think, over 15 years now. Um, Tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, sure. So I've been working at this intersection of digital transformation, business strategy, and so on for more than a decade by now. And I started as a tester, going then a bit more into quality assurance, then project management, then a bit of front-end development, and so on. So I tried to tap into multiple roles just to understand the whole picture a bit better, right? And while doing so, I realized more and more my specialty, which is actually building scalable digital solutions for these multi-brand organizations, while I'll help them streamline also their operations, but still, give them enough flexibility to maintain their own brand identity. And I think my background on, starting in all of these roles and going ahead helped me a lot understand different perspectives from different departments and stakeholders much better, while also having the technical knowledge and background to be able to actually build these platforms. And currently I lead the web and digital solutions department of this B2B company that you mentioned, and I focus mainly on global digital initiatives that have a impact on everything, basically, from technology platforms to customer experience, basically. And the big part of my work is aligning these complex brand portfolios with our digital tools that we do, and that we implement, but also the processes that we establish so we can unlock actual growth and operational efficiencies. And this is how I've operated the last couple of years, especially also with my previous employer, but also now too with the new employer. And again, I believe strongly that having these diverse roles in my past helped me a lot understand better the big picture, basically. And you need that big picture thinking if you try to build global platforms at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for context for any listeners that might not understand how an organization of this scale is typically structured. In most organizations, when we're talking about digital technology, digital solutions, and marketing solutions, we're dealing with a marketing department that's looking after the brand. We're dealing with an IT department that's looking after technology. When you get to a group level, the whole point of a group is to centralize a lot of the functions that all the different businesses would have, and therefore create more efficiency. And typically with large groups, the team that we would be engaging with would be what's referred to as a center of excellence, and that's the team that you're leading. Um, what challenges would you typically see in a group context that would not be present in any other typical organization?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I see four key areas. I think one of them being you have diverse brand identities, right? So each brand tries or has its own identity, audience, goals, making it very challenging for us to create a one size fits it all strategy, right? Um, Second thing is competing priorities. So each brand may compete for the same internal resources, for similar budgets or shared budgets for technology platforms that they need to use or want to use, leading also to us prioritizing certain things and also challenges in prioritization in general. Another area that is quite challenging, I would say, is the decentralized centralized structures, because many multi-brand organizations operate with a mix of central oversight and localized autonomy, which creates a certain complexity in aligning digital transformation efforts. But at the same time, this also gives them a lot of opportunity because, yes, on the one side, you need to centralize, but you need also to give the brands enough autonomy and flexibility on a local level because they know their audience best in their area, right? So if you have a specific brand in a specific country, it might differ for the same brand in another country. So you need to give them this level of flexibility for them to be able to adapt to their target audience, basically, right? And at the end, also, I would say another challenge would be shared dependencies, because you might have shared backend systems, you might have shared data sources, you might have, you know, changes for one brand that impact another brand. So you have to deal with all of this, basically, right? And you, as a multi-brand organization, you must strike a certain balance between centralization for efficiency, but also enough flexibility to cater for brand specific needs, I would say.
Yeah, so for all intents and purposes, the center of excellence is like an agency for all of these different brands within the same group. Would that be a good way of describing it?
Kind of, but more on a strategic level, I would say. This is where we try to be the driving force on a strategic level and show where we are heading to from the strategic side of things, but also helping out with the execution, of course.
Mm. So in my experience, you make it sound easy, but in my experience, trying to keep all of these stakeholders when you've got multiple brands and at brand level, it's typically marketers that are pulling in various conflicting directions. Um, in my experience, organizations typically take what I refer to as a cookie cutter approach. So you build a certain structure of um, a user interface and how a user interacts with that particular interface, and you keep a consistent structure, but then you fill it in with different content and different branding for the different brands. And this typically becomes a limiting factor, although a very efficient way of delivering these websites. Um, how do you manage these conflicted requests and factors that are pulling in various competing directions? How do you manage marketers of two different brands that are on different scales and that all believe they should be different?
Well, there are a couple of things I would say that play a big role here. One of them being that you need to balance out, the need for individual brand autonomy while still having a centralized digital strategy. That's one thing, which has a couple of key points that I would like to go into. One of them being that you need to define your non-negotiables, right? So you need to establish which aspect of your strategy must be centralized, such as core platforms, compliance, data security, that is centralized across the board. Um, and to centralize, for example, your CRM, to create certain unified user experience and customer data layer, but leave the content strategy out of it, so the brands have enough choice and flexibility to cater for their own identity, right? Next thing I would say would be to provide flexible enough frameworks. And I say flexible enough because you cannot give them full flexibility. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart, right? You need to allow brands to operate within a set of guidelines that enable autonomy while adhering to broader organizational goals, usually aligned to the vision and mission of a company, right? And we try to do that by providing brands, for example, with a design system library, giving them certain creative freedom within consistent visual and functional boundaries. I call this freedom in a box because it's not full freedom, but it's also not completely centralized where we dictate everything, right? But as an organization, you have to have a certain level of consistency across the board, which is really important, especially for user experience. And that's why a design system, for example, helps a lot here while still catering to the brand identities, right? And the last part, which people don't like to hear very often, is you need to have a certain governance model in place, right? In my opinion, you need to create cross-brand communities and committees to resolve conflicts early on and align also on shared priorities, right? And you need to have these governance processes in place at scale. You can't let everybody do their own thing, for sure not, because they are part of a multi-brand and centralized framework. And this is the world we live in, right? It's not a single brand, a single company, and they do whatever they want, right? In a multi-brand setup, there are certain rules that you have to follow, but if you follow them, you also have a certain level of freedom. The next thing, though, is it's quite important the kind of leadership style that you have while you do all of this, right? So, because you need to be able to resolve certain conflicting priorities early on across all the brands, right? Not even, I'm not talking about, you know, the majority of the small brands that you might have, but also across the mid-size and also the big brands. And first of all, you need to set a clear vision because, as a leadership team, you must articulate how digital transformations aligns with the company's overall mission and goals. Um, Ideally, you have set this up front so you know what you're doing, and your employee, because at the end of the day, your employees might ask why, and they should ask why, and you need to be able to give them an answer on this. This is super important because otherwise they lack a perspective. And this is not good as a leadership team if you don't give your own people enough perspective and what they're working towards on, right? Um, and if there is a conflict, you need to be able to mediate conflicts, right? So leaders should serve, as a neutral party, trying to balance the needs of a brand, but against organizational priorities, of course. So this is a bit of a challenge, of course, but yeah, it's part of the deal if you are in a leadership position in a multi-brand organization. At the same time, you need to have brand leaders that are empowered enough, right? What I mean by that is you need to give the brand managers a voice in shaping the strategy together with you. You need to include them from the get-go so they feel a certain level of ownership rather than compliance with the strategy of the centralized team, right? So you need to get them on board and then you act as a team, basically. And then there are, of course, also the technological parts of this, where I say, of course, you need to have certain scalability, flexibility. So your platforms that you are building, they must provide a certain variety for brands and their needs from simple websites that can be one pager sometimes, some quick campaign website that you put up in a matter of a day or two, but up to complex e-commerce systems, right? It really depends on the brand that you have in place and what they need, right? So you need to be able to cater for both parts. Um, Another thing which I think is very important is also how you integrate those capabilities, because whatever tool you choose, you need to be able to connect it to existing systems to minimize disruption, because people don't like disruption at all. And above all, whatever tool and technology you introduce, if it doesn't have a user-friendly interface, it will not work. It can be the best tool out there with the best technology, cutting edge, everything, all fine. If the user in front of it doesn't understand it, you lost already. So this is what I would say are the strategic alignments and the key things to keep in mind when you have this kind of approach with a centralized team with multi-brands in an organization of this size.
And when we talk about users, we're referring to content authors, marketers, brand managers. We're talking about internal users of
Exactly.
systems. Yeah.
Exactly. In this case, in this context, yes. At the end of the day, you have tools in place that people need to use for their daily work. And if they cannot use it, they cannot be efficient, they cannot do it properly, it will lead to frustration. And in the end, you will fail by having not the right tools in place with the right interfaces, right? And I'm not talking about customers that actually see your websites and everything at the end of the day, because there it's even more important that you have this in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my career, one of the things that I've noticed is probably the most overlooked thing when thinking, designing, implementing digital technologies is user adoption. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
how good a solution you implement, if the users don't want to use it or don't use it in the right way, it becomes useless. So how do you go about, and obviously in a large group where you're dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of different stakeholders and users, um, most of whom I would presume are not going to be very um, confident with technological adoption, let's say, or tech savvy. How do you manage user adoption across such a large audience?
You mean now for specific tools or for the platforms that we do in general?
Well, what so you're spearheading what I would call is a very sizable digital transformation. The organization that you've been working with for the past year, I've worked with for the past 18 years, and you've come in and you're basically changing everything from the top down, in a way that I actually am very supportive of, and I believe is going to modernize the whole organization. Um, there are a lot of people using the technologies that are in place today. The technologies you're changing are the technologies they use on a day-to-day basis to do their jobs, whatever that may be. Um, that's the audience that I'm talking about, and that's the audience that I would imagine is going to be quite challenging to get buy-in from on anything you do, because there's a level of anxiety amongst users of interfaces that they're not familiar with. There's natural resistance to change in any well-established and large organization. Is there anything that you can do proactively to overcome these challenges and hurdles?
I mean, these challenges you will always have, right? There is, like you already mentioned, there's always a certain level of resistance towards change, especially towards a lot of change, big change, right? And the thing is, when I joined this company, we saw a lot of things done in a certain way, which I didn't like. And, it is what it is. They had their reasons for that. But at some point, the company needs to evolve, the company needs to adapt, and the company needs to get to the next level. And the people that are behind this also need to do the same. And of course, you need to start, you know, from the bottom up to the top. You need to have, first of all, an aligned vision um, for the leadership team. But then also you need to get all of the buy-in from all of the people that actually need to use these things at the end of the day. Because, as a leadership team, of course, you can say, use this, use that. At the end of the day, the people that actually need to use it, they're the ones suffering if you don't do it the right way. So it's very important that they get the clear vision of the leadership team. They understand why we are doing this. They understand why everybody needs to roll up their sleeves now and do certain things to get to a certain direction, to do it the right way. And along the way, we provide them enough training for everything so they feel comfortable enough doing this change together with us. Because it's not like we're throwing in everything at them and saying, okay, this is it, go ahead, do your thing, right? You need to give them training, you need to give them guidance, you need to give them a little bit of hand holding, I would say, um, just so they feel comfortable enough to do this change together with you as a team. This is
Mhm.
very important.
Yeah, so I would imagine in any organization, especially in a sector such as, say, manufacturing, where these businesses have grown and matured at a time that predates typically the rise of the internet and digital interactions with clients. Um, and then, like in any mature organization, when you come in, you also have a lot of what I refer to as technological debt. A lot of things that have been done a certain way, implemented a certain way, and have been present for many years. And in my experience, organizations are great at adding things, but not so good at removing things. Um, how much of a problem is technological debt? And how do you, first of all, how do you do a reset? How do you do a cull of outdated content, outdated systems and solutions, and then following on from that, how do you ensure ongoing compliance and cleanliness of everything that's being added to the new solution?
Mhm. It's a good question. I mean, in my opinion, technological debt is one of the things that is a bit of a living nightmare at the moment, I have to say. We have our fair share of technological debt that we need to tackle right now, um, because otherwise, you're not gonna ever get rid of it. And the more you create on top of it, the harder it becomes to get rid of it. So this is something that you need to try to avoid at all costs. So you need to have at some point certain processes in place to do this on a regular basis, because technology becomes obsolete quite fast, and you might need to change tools. You might need to change to a new technology stack or whatever it might be, right? So you need to have also the mindset of not only adopting new technologies, but also getting rid of it efficiently and in a manner that makes sense, where you don't create too many dependencies, right? But having an organization like this and having the need of doing seamless integrations, especially into legacy systems, is something that you need to deal with anyway to some extent. But first of all, what I like to do a lot is basically whatever new technology that you try to add on top of something, if you have a certain middleware or APIs that you can use, that's already a pretty good bridge between old technology and new technology. So this allows you to bridge the gap between those two and also to have some sort of communication between those two systems. That's one thing. But at the same time, this is just an intermediary step, and you need to prioritize a gradual migration to the new system. You need to replace the legacy system in phases to minimize the risk, because sometimes there are critical systems in place, so you need to be careful with them. Especially if you are working for the banking sector, for example, it's not like you can just replace it like this. You need to be very careful here, especially when there's financial data involved. But yeah, at the same time, when it comes to data compliance and consistency across global operations, I believe that you need to have a centralized data governance. This is something that especially traditional corporations tend to adopt now. So they realize they need this, but they didn't have it so far, right? So it was catered around the world, and somebody was taking care of some type of data governance, but they never had a centralized data governance, which is really important because you need a global team responsible for compliance across all brands and all regions, right? But then on top of that, you need to localize within frameworks, which means that you need to adopt global compliance strategies so that they fit into regional requirements. You might have GDPR in Europe, you might have CCPA in the US and California, you might have an equivalent in Asia too that you need to adhere to, which might have slightly different rules and so on, right? So um, and at the same time, you should use technology for data compliance and consistency. So invest in tools that automate compliance tasks as much as possible. This is what I would do at least.
Okay, interesting. So, talking of tools and technologies, I can't help myself, but as anybody who's interacted or worked with me in any capacity will know, content management is something I'm very passionate about and have a lot of background in. And we find ourselves at a pivotal time in the content management space, certainly over the past few years, where I would say the whole industry has gone into two separate directions. So we've got one approach, which is now being referred to as digital experience technologies, where content management solutions are architected in a very monolithic way, where one solution does everything for you and creates an entire foundation for your entire digital strategy, whilst on the other, um, let's say, fork of that divide, you've got an adoption of microservices, API first, decoupled solutions. Um, I have to ask, this is really a 50-50 in who prefers what approach, in your opinion. What's a better approach, architecture approach for a complex multi-brand organization?
I would say the better approach is definitely the latter one that you mentioned, which means having something like a headless solution and working heavily with micro frontends, APIs, and so on with your own frontend in place. But this comes with a certain price tag because there is a lot more that you need to do upfront to get to a level where, compared to the first example that you said, these digital experience solutions that come out
Yeah.
of the box with almost everything,
Mhm.
they mostly have what you need, right? So there's less investment upfront. However, you get to its limitations pretty fast. So you reach its limitations quite early, and then you have to work on workarounds, or sometimes these solutions also provide some sort of decoupling that you need to work on later on anyway, right? So I very much prefer the headless part with micro front ends, with an architecture that allows you to be a lot more flexible, also in terms of technology, because having a CMS system of whatever technology stack that serves you for the next 5 years is fine. But on the front end side, a lot is changing quite fast. And you, as a company, right, you need to be able to adapt to this. Um, you cannot think like in the past where you said, okay, we're going to do an RFP, we're going to get one solution, and this solution will serve us for the next 10 years. It's not going to work like that anymore, right? As a company, you need to adapt. You need to adapt fast. You need to invest into these technologies. You need to invest into talent that can handle this technology. And yeah, that's basically it. And so my preference is pretty clear here, I have to say, even though it might be a bit biased by my current job role that I have.
Hey, I'm biased too because I agree with you. I believe that although in some contexts monolithic solutions make sense, flexibility is key. The ability to change those solutions and not have a total dependence on a single technology, and more importantly, a single company that's behind that technology, um, is very important for any serious organization. Um, so we're in
Absolutely.
agreement with that one. It was a little bit of a loaded question. I've got to be honest, because I just want the listeners to know it's not just me that's preaching this, but there's other individuals that are like-minded. So when you undertake a project of this size and scale, how do you measure the success of that project within the organization? Because whenever we undertake any project with a typical client, we'll say, if you can't measure it, don't do it. And we always talk about how we're going to measure the success of this project. In a typical scenario, it's relatively simple. If you're dealing with a single brand, you're talking about, how many transactions have they had, how much sale have they had. But in a context like yours, generating leads or transactions is only one factor, and that's a variable across different brands. So how do you measure the success of what you're doing, and what the central the what the central team is actually undertaking? How do you decide whether you're on track or not, and whether it was successful or not?
I mean, there are a couple of metrics actually that you can put in place once you have adopted these technologies, right? So there are business related metrics like revenue growth, cost savings that you generated. Um, then there are customer metrics like engagement, NPS, retention, but there are also operational metrics like time to market, adoption rates, and so on. So there are different ways of how you can measure this type of projects. The thing is, though, I'm not so sure how accurate you can define this upfront. In my experience, this is pretty hard actually, and you almost never succeed in accurately defining these metrics, and especially the targets of these metrics, right? So you can have the metrics, that's fine. This is one part of the deal, but defining the targets, it's much, much harder because there's a certain adoption rate, there's a certain time and period you need um, the technology needs to set in basically, right? Until if you, for example, do a new design on your website or a new design system across the board, you need to give it a bit of time for your customers who are used to what you had before to adapt to the new thing. Ideally, this is done pretty fast, and then you are even more successful than before if you've done your job right. Um, but you need to give it a bit of time after the adoption because you cannot measure this right away, day one, when you switch from one system to the other. That's not how it works, in my experience at least. But I don't know how do you see this one? Because again, in my experience, this needs a bit of time on customer side, but also on your internal stakeholder side, to adopt to all of this, even after day one, after you switched from one technology to the other?
Yeah. Well, in my experience, we always tell clients once you're going from an existing, let's say, website to a new website, if you take something like SEO, organic SEO rankings as an example, we always set
Mm,
expectations that straight after go live, there would be a dip and then there would be an increase thereafter. So it's an adjustment time frame. And that does make sense because everything takes time to bed in, and then you've got the user adoption. Um, but I suppose where, generally in any project, there's a business case arguing why that project is of value. And that business case typically has two main categories of benefits. One is generating additional revenue, whether that's through transactions or lead generation. The other is streamlining operational costs and reducing the amount of time it takes certain people to do certain things. Um, what you're saying makes a lot of sense for the front end, let's say KPIs. How many
mm,
marketing qualified leads are we getting? How many transactions are we getting? How many subscriptions are we getting? Whatever that may be. The What I was referring to more, that I think is more interesting and more significant in your context, is those internal metrics, right? If you reduce a daily task for 100 people from 5 minutes to 1 minute, you can actually, that becomes a massive cost saving for the organization, but it's very difficult to demonstrate these things. Do you do anything around this, and do you measure the internal impact that these changes in technology are having? Do you pay any attention to this, or is it more a case of just hoping that it'll have a positive impact and
mm.
hoping that the users will adopt it properly?
No, no, we definitely pay a lot of attention to this, especially to the details on this, right? Just to give you an example, we're switching currently CMS systems, and one of the key metrics is how fast you can create a page that is regionalized across 5 countries, for example, right?
Okay.
And we took our current CMS system, and how long it takes there, which is roughly 1.5 hours, which is quite a lot in my opinion, but it's
Yeah.
also not a good CMS system to begin with. And then compared it to the new one after one training session that my content team had, for example, and it took them roughly 20 minutes. And that was the
Well,
first iteration, right? So the more you do this, the more you train yourself on this, the faster you get with this.
yeah.
So this is already a huge improvement compared to what we have right now. And I know right now, for example, we're spending a lot of time dealing with issues around content. I mean, it sounds a bit weird because it shouldn't be this way, but it is what it is, right? So, and this alone already generates so many benefits for us for switching these two systems that you have a pretty good argument here alone, right? And this is just the content piece part. But then there are also technological pieces that you need to put in place, time to market, especially, which I like a lot actually, because with a new system like this, it's much easier to create a website from scratch, basically, right? Rather than in the old system where you had to do a lot of certain steps to get there. So use heavy, you can use heavily automations a lot more than in the previous system. You can use AI for certain things, and so on and so forth. And all of this helps you in your daily work, which reduces the amount of time you need to spend dealing with the tool and rather focusing on the task ahead, actually. And this is the part that I like the most about this.
You touched another buzzword there that I go on about a lot, but AI. Obviously, AI and machine learning is the next big thing. Now, personally, I see a lot of benefits and potential with AI, but it's yet to be demonstrated and proven in a real life context. Certainly from what I've seen. What role do you see AI potentially playing in a context such as the one that you're operating in?
I see a couple of key areas actually. One of them being personalization at scale, because what everyone by now has seen so far is AI helps deliver relevant content and offers that by analyzing, customer data, tailoring experiences to individual preferences while keeping a certain identity of the brand still intact, right? So this is really important. The next thing is customer insights, because machine learning uncovers trends, behaviors, and so on across brands. And you as a company are enabled to do data-driven decisioning, right? And align your strategy based on your actual customer needs, which is something we had this to some extent in the past, but not at this scale, right? So if you implement it the right way, this can help you a lot. Then there are operational efficiencies that come on top of this, which is for certain repetitive tasks, you can use AI now, right? Like content tagging, inventory management, and stuff like that. At the same time, it gives us more opportunities on the marketing optimization side, because you have now AI-driven tools that enhance, marketing efforts through programmatic advertising, sentiment analysis, for example, even campaign refinements and stuff like that. And this helps our brands stay competitive. I have to admit, we are not at this stage yet, but with the new systems in place, all of this is all of a sudden possible, right? And this is already a big step forward. Last but not least, there is SEO and content strategy, one of my favorite topics nowadays, because AI can analyze your search trends and can analyze your user behavior, so you can optimize your content for, to be able to be discovered easily and for relevance and boosting organic search and reach. And in my opinion, in summary, if I have to put this all together, I would say that AI, but also machine learning, right, are essential for multi-brand organization, because they provide the tools to deliver really exceptional customer experiences if you do it
Mhm.
the right way, while it tries to streamline your operations and also drive a strategic growth while preserving a certain brand uniqueness. But again, um, this is not easy to do. Putting just AI in front of everything, it's not gonna cut it, right? So you need to have certain talents in place. You need to have a certain partners in place as an organization that you can work with, because you won't have all the AI specialists in your organization, most likely, right? You need to have a certain infrastructure in place that supports all of this. This is not easy, right? And you need also to be able to invest a substantial amount of money into this area to be able to succeed here. So this is really important to understand. It's not an easy thing, like everybody else might think, because just because you can use ChatGPT, this is not it, right? There's a lot more behind the scenes that's going on to be able to get to this type of results, right? And it's not easily done.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a silver bullet in digital technology, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting in your response there, compared to most people that I asked a similar question, is everybody's focused around what it can do from the customer experience perspective, but you touched a lot on insights and gaining understanding as any seasoned marketer will know, the key to good personalization is driven based on understanding and insights. Um, so I like your perspective on that, and you're absolutely right. I concur. It's not a quick fix. There needs to be a strategy. There needs to be real life normalized use of it, rather than just assuming that what you see people do with ChatGPT online, that's it. Now everything's easy. We just tell the machine what to do, and that's what it does. Um, so I'm conscious that we're running a little bit over time wise again, but with someone like yourself, I could spend the next 3 hours talking about this and really geek out on some of this stuff, but I'm going to resist. Um, I always like to ask my guests to leave us with three tips and three pointers that would be relevant to to one of their peers. So if you're speaking to a vegan junior that's joining another large multi-billion, multi-brand organization that's inheriting this huge amount of technological debt and legacy systems and dissatisfied stakeholders all around. What are the top three tips you would give to that individual to be successful in his role and
Okay,
mission?
that's a good one. I will try to give you the top three and a couple of closing remarks on this.
Okay.
So the first tip would be prioritize high impact areas. Focus on 20% of the high impact areas that drive 80% of your revenue, because
Yeah.
this is key. Don't distract yourself from all of the noise that is around there. Focus really on this 20%, and you will succeed pretty fast, actually. Invest in scalable technology. Technology comes at a cost. It's not for free. And the sooner you understand this, the better, because then you will have the mindset to be able to invest in this and also succeed with technology. Technology can help you a lot if you invest in the right technology, if you invest in the right people and resources. Which brings me to my last point, which is build cross-functional teams that work together, that work closely together. In my experience, this has been one of the key things from the last 10 years, actually. Having cross-functional teams has been a blessing. And I actually love working with cross-functional teams. And whenever I see silos, I try to break them.
Mhm.
So this is really important. And closing all of this, in my
Just
opinion,
one
digital
question
trans.
on that
Yeah,
point, if you
okay,
don't mind, but just to
yes,
clarify, cross-functional teams, what you mean there is include stakeholders from across the organization and various departments to be involved in dealing with
of course,
challenges rather
of
than letting them
course,
happen on a department. I
of
just wanted
course,
to
exactly.
clarify that
Yeah,
for
thank
anybody
you for
that might not understand
clarification.
that.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
back to you, the closing remarks.
So, in my opinion, digital transformation has been a necessary step for organization to survive, right, and to thrive in the modern world. But it was also inevitable, right? But as we move forward, the focus shifts a bit more to digital evolution. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, right? And this is where the real opportunity lies, because continuously innovating, adapting, finding ways to stay relevant in a really increasingly competitive and fast-changing technological landscape. This is really important. It's not just about keeping up, it's about staying ahead now.
I love that. And I very rarely say this, Vigan, but I couldn't have said that better myself. So we 100% agree on that. It's about that continuous, perpetual innovation and digital transformation never ends, right? It's about that continuity.
It's
Um,
a mindset, right?
yeah, that's it. That what people don't realize is that digital transformation predominantly fails because of people and culture, not because of technology and budgets, right? So
Exactly. Exactly.
um, I'm glad to see that I'm not the only one that to who that seems so obvious. Um, Vigan, it's been a pleasure working with you for the past year. I've learned a lot, and I love the approach that you're taking within the organization that you're currently transforming. Um, Thank you for taking the time out to join me for this discussion. I hope we can have several more because I've already got five more topics that I want to discuss with you in my mind in due course, but this is all we've got time for. So thank you for joining me. I'm sure that anybody listening out there will find your wisdom very valuable. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.